As we get started for today's session, our Black History Month celebration for 2022, and this is an event that is organized by the Global Black Community Student Organization. It's a wonderful event where it has a total of 5 panel discussions throughout the month and a little known Black history fact that's being posted daily in the Google site that the Global Black Community has created. So I'll place that site in the chat for you. So as we get started today, I want you to know that our moderator, I am so proud to have one of our students, one of our PhD students, moderating today's session, Mr. Brian Weatherly. He spent 6 years in the Air Force, and he works as an adjunct professor as a computer information sciences person, right? He also has his PMP certification, so that project management professional. He has a bachelor's of science in information technology. He earned his MBA with an emphasis in technology management. He also has a master's of finance from UAGC, and right now is in our PhD program, I believe, in organizational development and leadership with a specialization in organizational diversity. So he has all those accomplishments, but he tells me that his greatest and most proudest accomplishment is the fact that he's a husband, a father, and a grandfather. So I'm excited today. I am going to get off of the screen and welcome you to our second session for the Black History Month 2022 celebration at the University of Arizona Global Campus.
Dr. Miller, thank you for that. That's a lot. I didn't realize I've done all that in my life. So today I have the privilege of hosting 4 panelists, 4 brilliant panelists for today's discussion that it's one step in a million-mile journey and one bite of a herd of elephants that we have to take to progress our country. So we'll start today by letting the panelists introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their privilege. Dr. Tobin, please tell us about yourself and your work around privilege.
Thank you, Brian. It's an honor to be part of this conversation today. My name's Tom Tobin. I'm one of the founding members of the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Mentoring at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I come to privilege because I tick a whole bunch of boxes. I'm the cisgender, heterosexual, white guy with gray hair. And what you're going to find out when we talk about privilege is that privilege stacks up. So you've got privilege no matter where you sit and where you're from. And I'm grateful to hear from everybody else today. So I'll take it back over to you, Brian, for more introductions.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Tobin. Dana, please introduce yourself and tell us about your work around privilege.
I'm Dana Harvey. I am a National Account Manager with MSC Industrial Supply, and I currently serve as the chairperson for my company's Black Inclusion Group. And so my walk around privilege is certainly multifaceted, and that there have been some privileges that I honestly had to identify that don't normally stand out, and then certainly had to work with the opposite of that. So I think I have a unique perspective in understanding what it's like to be disadvantaged or unprivileged, as well as recognizing the privileges that I do have and have gained over my life, and excited to share those.
Thank you for that, Dana. Dr. Stewart, please introduce yourself and tell us about your journey around privilege.
My name is Michael Stewart, and I'm currently the Assistant Superintendent of Maricopa County Regional School District in the great state of Arizona. And my walk around privilege is, I mean, the building blocks are everywhere. I'm privileged to have, a great education, come from a loving, laughing family, great support, networking around things that I needed to do to make myself successful. So, I mean, there's just, to Dr. Tobin's part, there's just so many different levels of privilege, I think, when we'll discuss that more as we go on, but I think I'm just glad to be here.
All right, we're glad to have you. And last and definitely not least, Poppy. Welcome, Poppy. Please introduce yourself and tell us about your experience with privilege.
Brian, thanks so much. It's such an honor to be invited to be included in this conversation today. Let's see, my journey around privilege really began early in my life as a foster youth, really almost counter to what I just heard Michael say, a different kind of experience in my youth. And as an adult, coming to understand racial privilege, it was difficult to make sense of that, having not had a lot of privileged experiences in my earlier life. So I think the intersection of those two realities, a white woman privileged by higher education, and then the realities of early trauma and involvement in the foster care system, those two things are sort of what I bring to this conversation personally, and then certainly professionally throughout my life. Working in higher education right now, I am the director for disability support programs and services at the San Diego Community College District, as well as the Title IX coordinator there. So multi-lens, and again, just really feeling honored to have been included in this conversation.
Well, thank you for joining us. Thank you very much. All right. So let's get right into this. And I'm going to ask all five of you to lean into this kind of heavy. And
one more introduction, Brian.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. Oh, Rosie, Rosie, I apologize. I am so sorry, Rosie.
Rosie, all the time. It's all right.
I apologize. I was using my video strip to count
I'll just
everybody.
go off stage left and we'll all talk, right?
No, please, no, Rosie. Please introduce yourself and tell us about your journey with privilege.
All right. So my name's Rosie, and I'm honestly here now. I'm just going to say this out loud. I'm going to blame Dr. Newt, but he told me to be blunt and honest in myself. So no, none of those letters after my name, none of that. I'm really honestly here just because I have a really big mouth. That's the truth. And I have a very can't fit it into four minutes kind of intro. So let's just start with, I was born into an inordinate amount of privilege. And I think that's part of what makes it different. It was political, financial, spiritual privilege, just everywhere I went. On the other hand, it was also an environment of extraordinary abuse. And I learned really, really young to use my privilege as the biggest stick I could possibly use it as, to try and change everywhere I went and everything I was involved in, long before we had words like this, to be totally honest. I would have never used the word privilege back then. I'd used other words, and I'm going to try and keep those words nice and clean and professional here. But my experience with privilege has been using everything that I was ever given or just inherited simply by how I look or where I was born or what my last name was at the time, to beat up everybody I can to try to make a difference. Is that cool?
That's very cool. Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for that. You know, and Rosie, as an apology for missing on you the first time, I am going to let you go first on the first question, the first statement. And I'm going to ask all of us to lean in heavy, because the only way to have this conversation is open, honest, and Rosie, since it sounds like you have a history of that, I'm going to ask you to lean in first and say yes or no. Does privilege exist? And if it does, what kind of privilege do you believe is out there?
Well, yeah, I think that's just sort of we wouldn't have this panel, right? So yeah, I think it's kind of obvious that privilege exists. Like I said, I don't know that I would have used that word, but it's as good as any. As far as what kind of privilege is out there, here's my take on things. This is how I judge every room I walk into. Who controls the narrative? I decide what side of the privilege I am currently on in the room I'm currently in by who controls the narrative. So in academics, who writes the textbook? Who decides the curriculum? You know, so whoever, to me, if you control the narrative, then you control the truth. And if you do that, not by something you've earned, like I've written 4 books on the subject and therefore people are asking me, but by something that just is, you have privilege.
All right. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Poppy, can you lean into that question? And yes or no, is there privilege? And if yes, what privileges are there?
Well, most certainly privilege exists. I'll second Rosie's, otherwise we would not be here, most certainly. I think the topic of racial privilege is one that is most at question in this moment. And I would say, as I shared earlier, my adult journey has been around understanding white privilege and understanding the ways, as a white woman, I benefit from that. I think that the frame that I use on the topic of privilege is related to the ability or not to avoid a particular identity group. So race in this case, if I can casually avoid race or thinking about race, then I experience privilege related to my race. There are other privileges, of course, socioeconomic, most certainly. I think coming from my perspective, having family, coming from a safe, stable family is a privilege. And as a Title IX coordinator, I would be remiss to not mention gender. And in our society, most certainly, there is a privilege in being male. So that is my short answer to a big question.
Yes, thank you for that. Thank you for that. Dana, yes or no, is there privilege? And if yes, what privileges are there?
You know, I'm going to take just a little turn, if you don't mind. I actually want to tell a little story with the PowerPoint. Are you okay if I do that?
I am fine with that, yes.
Okay, great. I'm going to see if I can share my screen here. Let me know if you see that.
We do, yes.
Okay, so I may have to have Dr. Tobin. Are you able to see me without the pictures? Or what would I do to take the pictures out? Are you guys comfortable with that?
Yeah, you're fine.
Great. Okay, so this is really the story that I want to share. And it's just a little bit about me. You know, my kid was in kindergarten and they made her do these big posters. Tell me a little bit about you. So I thought I'd tell you just a little bit about me and what I see as privilege and a definition. And I'm going to start by a story, right? Because people remember stories, and hopefully you remember this. But when I was younger, I mentioned that I had both sides of privilege, what I thought was disadvantages and also advantages. And we are saying privileged and non-privileged. But when I was younger, one of my favorite memories was summer vacation. And every year we would take this 3-hour round trip from Indianapolis, Indiana, which was my home, to Kings Island in Cincinnati, Ohio. And my parents would pick me and 4 or 5 of my cousins in the car and throw us in the back seat. That floor was so rusted that we could see straight through the highway. And we knew not to get our feet too close to those doggone baseboards or we would just slip through the cracks. Now, that's a dangerous situation, but when me and my cousins get together today, we still really laugh about those stories. But during those rides, we spoke about, dreams and aspirations and what our life would be like. And we kind of talked about respect for yourself and others. And I really learned young and early in my life that when you are driving toward a destination, that the journey is really always filled with obstacles, right? And the risk sometimes is worth it. But as we get into this world that we live in now, and I know this may be another topic that you asked, but I kind of want to talk about it here, and then we can go back if you want, Brian. We learned that the family dynamics, good, bad, indifferent, whatever our privileges were, we actually have to face our adult lives sometimes going through holes that are also dangerous. So my metaphoric hole, right, of the hole in the floor in the car, we have to face those in our adult life. Sometimes they're small ditches that you don't even know that you're getting in, and sometimes they're big holes. And we have to deal with those type of societal holes in the floor. And I found myself early on trying to understand, how do I do that? And so what I do, and what I really have tried to do over my life to really navigate or mitigate some of those holes, societal holes, was really manage my attitude, nurture allyship, and really create a board of directors. And there's different things up under there, right? When we talk about attitude, it's like know your worth, know your surroundings. When I talk about trying to mitigate those holes, I also talk about how do you nurture allyship. You seek counsel with people, you open yourself up to listen, and you really want to be able to take that feedback from people that you trust. With that, I've also had this great board of directors, my personal board of directors, to help me navigate some of the societal and personal goals. My board doesn't always tell me what I want them to hear, and I do think about voting them off the island when they do that. But I actually know that I trust them. They have my best interest in heart. And so together we keep charting down the road to make a change in the world. And I think, when I kind of just look about privilege, each person on the panel has talked about their different perspective of privilege and where their perspective is and what they bring to this discussion. And I'm telling you, I'm quite honored to also be able to share my story and what that looks like. And I would just say, in summary, just what I thought of privileges, that yes, there's different kinds of privileges. I think, that Poppy talked about social, economic, racial privileges. She mentioned different type of privileges. So yeah, there are different kinds of privileges that I think each of us bring to the table. And I think as we realize what those were, Gandhi said it best, that we really have to be the change that we wish to see in the world. So that is, I don't know if you wanted that information, but that is what I wanted to share, what I see as privilege.
Yes, that is greatly appreciated, Dana. Yes, we did want that information, and thank you for sharing it. Yes,
absolutely.
Yes. Dr. Stewart, can you tell us if privilege exists? And also, I believe there may be a share you have for us.
Sure. Yeah. Privileges, does it exist? 100%. For me, the way I kind of wrap my head around it, I think privilege is the ability not to have to question, and then you fill in the blank. Race, religion, sex, gender identity, wealth, education. And as you go through there, and as you talk about those things, and you talk about potholes and things like that, how you navigate those things are all filtered and factored somewhere in the intersection of one of those. So I do believe that it exists. And let me try and share my share with you here. Let's see. Where did I get the shadow place? Sorry about that. There it is. Okay. So, for me, again, it's kind of about the building blocks. It's about what makes me, and my history and the things that I have gone through, while maybe specific or similar to others, it's uniquely mine. So for me, I was born and raised in rural Illinois, raised Catholic. My mother is Irish Catholic. My father is African American Southern Baptist. So I've always seen society from a different perspective than the majority of my peers. My father's side of the family was from Indianapolis, so major holidays, weekends, and summers, I would spend my time there. So going back and forth and literally driving between those two worlds, you see things differently. And you experience things differently, and you get to ask questions. And again, to my privilege of having grown up in a loving, caring, nurturing, encouraging household, I was encouraged to ask those questions. And I didn't feel the fear or the ability that I wasn't able to ask. So I felt safe. So moving on to talking about more of my privilege, I moved to a small town in northern Indiana where I went to school, got my first real grown-up job, working in southwestern Michigan, and with the welfare reform program of the early 90s. And again, really exposed, and you see different things and you talk to different people and you learn things kind of as you move through to where you are. And then throw other things on there. My education has been very diverse. My work history, I was in education, was in law enforcement. Now I'm back in education. So I have a different perspective on everything that is going on. You talk to my peers in education, my views might be a little more conservative, but you put me in law enforcement with my peers and people I worked with then, well, my ideas might be a little liberal, but my opinions and my views don't change. So it really kind of depends on where you are and how you interact with those different situations. My current reality, I work in a school district where we serve the youth that have fallen through the cracks of all the other public schools in the area. Some are suffering from housing insecurity. They transferred out and they just don't fit into a high school with 3,000 students. They kind of fall through those cracks. And my school is very small. We have about 74% Hispanic, 20% African American, Native American, Caucasian. The question or the issue there with my situation that we're working in is that 100% of my teachers are Caucasian. Longer story on how we got there, but we're trying to do things differently. So we realized that as our teachers were struggling, and even though they were veteran teachers, why might that be? So we really looked at, what can we do to kind of create a sense of genuine self-reflection and mindfulness about the things that we've all been taught. If there are any educators on the panel, which I know there are, at some point in time, we all had a teacher tell us, or I wouldn't say I saw a slide. It was one of the sheets that they put up on the overhead projector, but it was a picture of a student, and the teacher was pouring knowledge in to their head. Many of us had seen that, but that is a deficit mindset in thinking that our children come to us needing something. Like there's nothing. They're very successful, and they've gotten to this point without us, and it's our job to help them see what they have and move them forward. So we've done a lot of work and kind of really working with our teachers and trying to change in their mindset and their perspective on how is my privilege clouding or inducing blindness to the otherness. So really kind of working around and trying to open those lines of communications at the educator level as they work with and continue to work with our students. I will stop sharing. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you for that excellent presentation, Dr. Stewart. Poppy, I apologize for not offering you an opportunity to share your presentation with us. Can you please share that with us now?
Brian, I'm going to tell you what I remind my team at work almost every week. We're not needing to do apologies with one another. We won't be sorry for our dogs or the noise outside or our kiddos coming on screen, because we're going to express and exhibit grace to one another. So please, no apologies necessary.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. Maybe somebody will take that away from today's presentation. Oh, look at that. Forgive me for not being at the ready here. There we go.
No apologies needed.
So I mentioned my role at the San Diego Community College District, and I wanted to share just ever so briefly in talking about the topic of privilege, how deeply I believe that this discussion is linked to the notion of belonging. Of course, having a history as I do, having aged out of foster care and sort of stumbled into adulthood without a sense of a net beneath me, meant that a lot of my adult journey has been related to a search for belonging. And Michael, of course, did a really wonderful job presenting his professional work as an educator. I think certainly this is a personal, professional journey that I've been on. And no one says it better, in my opinion, than Brene Brown. This image, true belonging never asks us to change who we are. True belonging requires us to be who we are. So I wanted just to share a little story of this wonderful group of human beings. These are my master's cohort mates. This is 2007. I was 35 years old. I had been crawling toward an advanced degree my entire adult life. And this diverse and rich group of humans were the first ever to say to me, "You have racial privilege." And I, of course, answered with a shaking voice that I couldn't imagine how I had privilege. I had not had that lived experience. And so much of who I have become in the last 15 years really stems from the privilege of this education. The community-based block program at San Diego State is a master's in counseling. Social justice sits at its core of its mission, and it really is about developing culturally competent educators and clinicians to serve and support those individuals and communities who have been grossly underserved. So coming to this conversation about privilege, really, this is this group is a huge part of my journey. And I think, I want to be here contributing what my views are, but I wanted also I knew immediately I wanted to share this Ibram Kendi piece from The Greatest White Privilege is Life Itself in the Atlantic, because I think the context is so powerful. White privilege is the relative advantage that racism affords people identified as white, and conversely, Black deprivation is the relative effect of racist policies and ideas on Black people. And he closes with, "There may be no more consequential Black deprivation than life itself." And this piece really unpacks all that might be involved in that conversation. But for me, this was the most important thing, I think, to share today. And so much of my journey has been in reading the work of Black, Indigenous people of color in order to be open to educating myself and to growth, and conversely, in being the educator that I want to be, the human, the mom, the partner, the friend. So just to close, I was thinking about what have been the conditions for exploring my privilege and what might be helpful on this panel. And you started us today, Brian, by saying what I say so often: let's lean into our discomfort. Being willing to have a curiosity about the experiences of others, and empathy and a commitment to our shared connection and responsibility to each other. And then finally, and this is my swan song, a belief in the power of love to manifest a more just world. So, perhaps more deeply than, is privilege real or not real? My sense is that we're perhaps beyond that part of the conversation to, okay, now how do we dig in? How are we open and willing human beings to have a conversation, to sit in conversations where we might feel uncomfortable, etc. So hopefully that brings my sliver slice to the conversation, Brian.
Thank you so much for that. That was amazing. Thank you. Dr. Tobin.
Thank you very much, Brian. And I'll unmask a little bit. I'm the academic researcher on privilege, accessibility, those kinds of things. I am an advocate for the rights of people with disabilities in the educational spaces. I study universal design for learning and other ways of lowering barriers for folks. So everybody who's here on this live call and everyone who's watching the recording, take a moment and think about your access to materials, each other, content, your instructors, people who can support you, staff members, whether you're a student or an instructor, or you're part of the administration of the college or the university. Think about the roles that you play and the people who can be in community with you. And I see that we've got some things coming in on the chat and on the Q&A. So keep those questions coming, because after me, we're going to open up the conversation to the directions that all of you want to talk about. Now on your screen is a quick title slide. It says, let's talk about privilege. It's got my smiling face and my name, Thomas Tobin, and the University of Arizona Global Campus logo on there. I'll say also that I've put a handout together with a lot more specific things that you can do, whether you're a student or a teacher, or you play some other role in higher education, in order to help recognize the privilege that other people have, recognize the privilege that you've got, and help to lower barriers and be in community with each other. I heard Dr. Stewart and Poppy say this: privilege is invisible to its holders without intentional effort. So a lot of us growing up didn't know that we had privilege until other people told us, hey, by the way, I didn't have those advantages that you have, or those kinds of things. Here's a case in point. On your screen is an intersection as seen from above. So it's two roads crossing, there's cars, there's a train, there's people on the sidewalk. That's kind of what we're talking about when we say the word intersectionality. Dr. Newton Miller asked a number of colleagues to be on this panel, and many white colleagues declined because they would feel awkward talking about race-based issues, either because they weren't experts in the field, they didn't want to be seen as representing whiteness, or they were just afraid that they would unintentionally say something that could be perceived as insensitive or offensive. I got news for you. I guarantee you're going to say something wrong or get it wrong as you have these conversations. Welcome to the human race. But in not wanting to misstep, many of us shy away from even entering conversations that might be challenging. That's a wrong way to think about privilege. Rather, think about how each of us brings privilege and its lack with us as part of our identity. We're composed of several different kinds of identity: our ethnic, social, gender, cultural, ability, group-based, geographical identities. They all intersect to form our sense of who we are. Our intersectionality shifts and changes over time too, based on our life experiences. So here's the secret. We can take pride in the elements of our identities, recognize where we hold privilege, and the crucial distinction, act to support, amplify, and advocate for those people who have fewer privileges. This moves us from just performative allyship, doing a land acknowledgement but not actually helping your First Peoples colleagues on campus, that kind of thing, into intentional and active allyship. We want to make time for everybody's questions, so let me do a lightning round of 4 things you can do. On your screen now is a UAGC graduate. She's in a cap and gown, she's got flowers, and her husband's standing next to her in a t-shirt that says, "I survived my wife's master's degree." And foster action-based allyship with colleagues from dominant groups. And if you're part of that dominant group, say you're a man and you know that women in your space often get talked over or get interrupted, hold space for them in conversations. There's a lot more to it, but this is a lightning round, right? Now on your screen is an image of a UAGC student. She is in her military gear and she's somewhere serving overseas. Negotiate and name the intersection of social status and your approach to interactions. So in plain language, people with marginalized identities, they want to be inclusive and be innovative as much as the rest of us. But oftentimes doing so puts them at risk. So purposefully say what are the differences that you see among folks and help to bridge those as much as you possibly can. Now on your screen is a UAGC graduate. She's in her cap and gown, and her extended family is around her. Her husband, her sons, her young daughter, they're all standing proud of their mom. And respect the variability among everybody, not just the students who go to your schools, but also among the staff members, the instructors, the leadership team. Have an opportunity to talk about diversity according to many different types of intersections up and down the entire chain of your organization. And last, find trained help. Here is another UAGC graduate, close up. She's in her cap and gown, holding a bunch of books. You should not attempt to become an overnight expert on the intersection of status and teaching practices and those kinds of conversations. If you're part of a dominant group, avoid asking your marginalized colleagues to help you figure out your boundaries on your comparative privileges. Rather, turn to folks who are faculty developers, colleagues, people who are trained and experienced in balancing inclusion for learners and space for instructor presence and authority in your college or university. That's the lightning round version. There's a bigger handout for you. Now it's the title screen again, and there's my website. It's thomasjtobin.com. I'd love to continue the conversation with everybody even after this live session is over with. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to Brian. We've got some questions coming in from our participants, don't we? And Brian's going, but he's on mute. So we've hit the Zoom trifecta for the meeting.
All right. We have a couple of questions here, and please don't hesitate with any questions you have for us. If you look in the bottom middle of the screen, there's a Q&A button, and that's where we will be fielding our questions from. Right now, we have 2 questions from William Hamilton. His first question is, what are some points to help us express and exhibit grace with one another? Who would like to take that one first?
I'll throw it out there. I am a fan. I won't necessarily call myself an expert in the field, but servant leadership. Servant leadership has many components, but one of them is empathy, listening, and awareness. I think if you can just kind of look at those 3 things, and one, have empathy, not only for others, but for yourself, because that is important too. But if you approach things from that mindset or from that lens, I think it'll allow others to feel comfortable around you, and then you'll be able to have those difficult conversations and get to the meat of what you need to do.
All right, thank you for that, Dr. Stewart. But anybody else like to comment on that question?
Well, Brian, grace is my word for 2022. So how can I not chime in here? It strikes me that the most important concept that I meditate on when I'm thinking about exhibiting grace in my day-to-day is a sincere and core belief that most people are doing the very best that they can from minute to minute. I believe that's true for myself. I'm sure it's true for this panel, and for most of the folks that we interact with. And that's a good starting place. I also want to offer that grace doesn't always show up looking polished. Perhaps our panel is evidence of that today. I'll be the unpolished side of the the spectrum. But it does continue to show up no matter what. And so, I think I heard Tom say there were other white colleagues that approached unwilling to engage in the conversation, and that is not surprising, but it does feel sad. And so I think just showing up and having an open heart is a really important first step.
I'm going to take a different side of the coin on that, because I can say from an African-American woman perspective, part of the conversation that I wanted to have is that we also have to take ownership and be vulnerable and understand that everyone is really trying, I believe, it's my personal belief system, trying to make the world a better place. And a lot of times we have to watch our attitude and be open to questions, because if we're not willing to take a question that may be sensitive, how will the world know what's important to us? So I think, first of all, we have to understand that we have to take ownership. A lot of things that people are asking us about, we don't even know how we feel about it ourselves. You get different African Americans have different opinions on how to wear your hair. Is this the appropriate thing? There's just not one thing. So when someone asked a question, I'm going to go with you, Rosie. We've got to, first of all, give ourselves grace. And I think the vulnerability of saying, I don't really know how to answer that, because I'm not sure what you're after. A lot of that is trusting. And so you've got to be approachable. You've got to make sure not only is everyone really trying to have the space where we can make the world a better place, we have to be vulnerable and open. And for the person approaching us, it's okay to say, I'm not even sure how I feel about that. Can we process? Can we talk? But I really do believe conversation is the key to change.
Thank you for that. Rosie, do you have something to?
Yeah, I'm going to be the jerk in the room again. But that's just how it's going to be. Listen, when I'm sitting here and I'm listening and it's all this love and grace, I just want to reach through here and hug the hell out of Poppy and, Dana and all that. But I got to tell you, not everybody wants this. It's so easy for us to get on a panel and have a conversation and say, oh, I hope that everybody's looking for this. And I hope that we all want to, and I'm not disrespecting not one person here, but I'm telling you, I can introduce you to 10 people that even this concept would enrage so badly that they would do physical violence on the people participating. So to me, this is a strange suggestion, but this is what's worked for me. Is I have a buddy, basically. Her name's Ginger. She is so smart and articulate, like, the panelists here today, and she is loving like Poppy is, and it's just so great. And then there are times when she's like, hey, Rosie, help this. Because they're not, the gentleness, the grace, the compassion works, in my opinion, 80-90% of the time. And then there's those people that they're going to just take that, flip it on the ear, use every word you say against you, work actively against you, use everything that they've got in their quiver to shut you the hell up. And that's at the very least. So I love what we're saying, but I think we need to be aware too that all the talking in the world, sometimes there's people actively not wanting this. And I don't care if it's race, gender, whatever you wanted to say. But I'm going to specifically say race. I'm just going to say that out loud, specifically race. Yeah, there's a huge gender crap going on in the world too. And as you can see from my pronouns, but I could just not put that there. I could just not put that there and nobody'd know the difference. So I'm like I said, I'm going to be the jackass in the room again, but I'm going to remind everybody that sometimes talking ain't going to do it. Not everybody's listening. And we have to decide, I feel I had to decide, what's it worth to me? How much am I willing to give up? How far am I willing to go? And if the answer isn't all the way, then I think we've started to identify privilege.
Oh, thank you, Rosie. That was really powerful. Dr. Tobin, I think you have something you want to say.
Actually, I want to mention in the Q&A, there's a question from Flower Darby that flows right on from what Rosie is talking about. Yes. Flower is saying, when someone denies that white privilege, for example, exists, what are effective ways to invite discourse about privilege? It seems challenging to engage without that person shutting down or withdrawing. How do we avoid raising barriers to communication when we discuss privilege? And a couple other people asked similar questions here. William Hamilton asking, how do you have a conversation with a privileged individual without making them feel uncomfortable, or are they supposed to be uncomfortable? So I'm imagining that with the life experiences that we have on the panel, there are some concrete things that we can share here. And am I raising up an idea here that folks would like to address?
I definitely think it's a relevant question, Dr. Tobin, and it would be great to hear from the panel on ways we can approach people and even people hesitant to have this conversation. How can we pull them into the conversation and have it gently or otherwise, as Rosie put it?
And I see
you know how I'm going to answer this, Tom. You know how I'm going to answer this. It's supposed to be uncomfortable. And even the loving, sharing, positive environment, if you haven't gotten to the point where you're uncomfortable, you haven't gotten there yet. Keep going. I'm not saying push it. I'm not saying hit people in the head. But if, even just for your own personal growth, if you haven't gotten to the point where you're like, crap, then you haven't had the conversation then.
And I think your point kind of gets to what are the new and cool words to talk about, and we talk about allyship and being an ally. And when I was younger, that was called getting your ducks in a row. Those were your ducks. Raise your hand if you had your ducks in a row until it came time to take action. You turned around and they were gone. So to Rosie's point, it's a balance. Like, you can't get people behind you if you're aggressively in their face all the time and argumentative and yelling, but it's a balance. I need allies to help get me to where I need to go, or to push the idea forward. But to take it a step further, I need an accomplice. You know what I mean? I need a freedom writer. I need someone who's going to take some lumps, and be there with me. Allies are great if I had a bad day, but if we're really trying to push the message and get things to that next level, you have to have your team has to have a little bit of everybody. I had cousins that grew up on the South Side in Capitol, down in Indy, so depending on what side of town I got in trouble in, I knew who I needed to call. So, I mean, you need to have you need to stack and have your allies at different levels and be prepared to call on them. But to do that, you have to be able to talk. So, and we can't shut everybody down. So, I mean, it's a balancing act, because some people need to be shut down.
Some people Dr. Stewart, who knew we were cousins. I know I got people down on Capitol, so watch it there. I know what that's like in Indianapolis. And I'm going to go with Rosie. There's, me and my husband, we talk a lot about that. And the conversation, transparent. If it's just us, it's like, you're not going to get everybody to be a part of this. Well, we know that. And that's never really the goal, because that's an impossible goal. But to get a few to want to make a change, the ripple effect will go a long way. And so what we do today is going to have a big impact. And that's what I look, I don't want my kids or my grandchildren to still have the same exact conversation today 20, 30, 40 years from now. We want, and sometimes these conversations we're having today are the same exact conversations that we had 20 years ago. So we've got to take a chance, knowing that is the world going to change? That's unrealistic. But knowing that there are more allies that wanted to change, that see a need for change. And I think the George Floyd piece specifically woke the consciousness of America up, saying maybe we need to do something different. So I think the mighty, the small, can become the mighty. Maybe not today, but definitely in time.
Definitely. Thank you for that. Poppy, I think you had something you wanted to add as well.
Well, I was just thinking about, I think there are two sort of coincidentally occurring conversations here. One is related to how we engage, so around communication with individuals who may or may not be willing or interested in engaging on the topic of privilege, justice, racial justice, et cetera. And the other is how we have an impact toward a more just world. And they're not, the communication tools are important, but it's not all about how we win people over one at a time. I think the thing that's so compelling to me about Kendi's work is that he really focuses on policy. So, recognizing that changing the individual hearts and minds of all the people around us is not likely to happen, where we have real measured impact is about looking at policies. So I'm so sorry, I'm scrolling through the chat and I'm trying to find who asked this question. And forgive me, I'm not seeing your name immediately, but the question was about how do staff and faculty have an impact on racial justice at work? I'm paraphrasing here. And to me, that's where you really look at, am I a hiring manager? To Michael's story about disproportionately white faculty in predominantly minority school district, really being willing to look at what are the data telling us about the individuals and groups we're serving, and then how are those policies maybe unintentionally impacting negatively some groups of students. That's where we move, I think, to the topic of equity in this work. And so I just, my sense is we're talking about communication and winning hearts and minds, and we're talking about impact. And Dana, I heard you when you said ripple. I am with you. I think we find our lane and we do the work that works for us. So Rosie, I love that your style is direct and it is who you are, and I accept you and I embrace you for that. And I know who I am, and that's gonna be my lane to making an impact. So I really do feel this is inside work, and it manifests externally, but it really is knowing who we are, accepting and embracing that, and then working from that position.
Thank you for that, Poppy. This is probably a conversation that could last for years with just us talking about it and doing things about it. This is a powerful conversation. And I hope that we can take this conversation and go out into our lives and live it and practice it. But on that note, unfortunately, we only have an hour. And I want to give this powerful panel at least a minute, if not more, to give us some closing thoughts. And I'll ask you to multitask. And with your closing thoughts, please give us some examples of ways that we can use privilege to elevate other people. And I'll go from left to right on my screen because that's the only order I have. Dr. Tobin, can you go first, please?
Absolutely. I'm grateful for everybody who's been part of the panel and everybody who's here on the live call and those of you who are going to be watching the recordings. And one way that we can take privilege and create community out of that is to actually name it. One of the challenges with privilege is a lot of folks who are in positions of privilege don't understand the difference between having that privilege and not having it because they haven't lived other experiences. So just in, talking to your colleagues, your classmates, your instructors, your leadership team at the university, and don't do it by yourself. Do it in like 2s and 3s and 5s and 10s of you, to Dr. Stewart's point about having people who've got your back. Those are the kinds of conversations that actually change minds, change perspectives, and create real allyship. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Tobin. Dana, can you go next, please?
Absolutely. So this is a privilege today to be a part of this distinguished panel. I'm quite honored and humbled to be a part of it. So being able to have a voice and speak our truth and be intentional one step at a time. I owe that to myself. I owe it to the kids. I owe it to the next generation. And I would ask all of us to take it personal and be intentional, and don't let the soothsayers, if you will, or the negative voices that you hear around us stop us from moving forward. So intentionality and purpose is what I would say we should move forward with.
Thank you, Dana. Dr. Stewart, can you give us your closing thoughts?
It probably goes along with name it, but it's more specific, and it's like, get a common language. Understand where we're coming from, because privilege doesn't mean you're racist, sexist, any of those isms. It just means what it means. It just means it's something that you have. So I think being mindful, having a sense of mindfulness, and being able to be genuinely self-reflective on who you are, where you are, and how you got there, I think will help get everyone to the next level. Everyone has the opportunity to learn and move. Some move further than others. Today's panel is a great example. Some people who were watching it may have made 2 steps. Some people maybe made 1, but everybody has the opportunity to move forward. And I think the truth about yourself is the hardest thing to accept. So I think being willing, having grace for yourself and for others, I think will just put you on the right path.
Thank you for that, Dr. Stewart. Rosie, can you give us your final thoughts?
Oh, yeah. All right. Look, this is my final thought. I'm going to challenge all of us to not speak differently depending on the room we're in. That's my challenge. If we want to make real change, and I know we've got all this really great stuff, and 100%, I'd love to just applaud everyone. But in a practical sense, don't talk differently when you're not around other folks. So, obvious example, if I find myself talking differently in a room full of white folks than I talk in a room that's got all kinds of folks in it, I'm wrong. Challenge yourself to stick up for the same things that you would stick up for if somebody could see you doing it, whether that's women or gender or sexuality, race, all of it. Don't talk differently just because you're in a different room. Because that day-to-day change, that can do some great work.
Thank you for that, Rosie. Just to share a little bit, that's what my dissertation is authenticity. I think that's something that we all can do better. So thank you for that, Rosie. Last but definitely not least, Poppy, please share your final thoughts.
Well, I think I shared my final thoughts in my last share, but I just want to say, yes, 100% yes to every single thing I just heard. Showing up who you are in every space that you're in. Dana, thinking about the ripple for the future, naming and claiming, being authentic, all of it. I just am so thrilled to have been here. Thank you so much, Dr. Miller, for the invitation. And that is all from me. And Brian, thank you for moderating.
No, thank you. Thank you, the panelists. This was a great conversation. Unfortunately, our time is up. Dr. Miller, thank you for organizing this. Hopefully we can do this again soon. It doesn't have to be Black History Month for us to have this conversation. And on that note, we thank the University of Arizona Global Campus, our panelists, and for everybody who joined us. I hope that everybody who joined us got something meaningful from this conversation. Thank you, and everybody have a great day.